They fired me on a Wednesday morning as if I were disposable. What they didn't realize was that I held the one thing keeping the company alive, the only key to the payroll vault. By Friday, 2,000 employees would be checking their bank accounts and finding nothing. No money, no loyalty, no silence. That kind of mistake doesn't just bruise a company, it burns it to the ground. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from? Trust me, you'll want to hear how this unfolds. They fired me on Wednesday morning in the kind of cold, scripted way executives rehearse when they think they're in control. The CFO, Mark Hollis, didn't even look at me when he slid the papers across the table. Restructuring, he said flatly, as if one word could erase 10 years of my life. The CEO, Daniel Whitmore, nodded from the corner, pretending to be busy with his phone, too cowardly to meet my eyes. No thanks, no acknowledgement, just an escort waiting outside the conference room like I was a security risk instead of the person who had quietly kept their empire from collapsing every single week. I didn't argue. I didn't give them the reaction they wanted. Instead, I looked at the stack of forms. Severance agreements, exit documents, the paperwork of erasure, and thought about the one system they hadn't thought about at all. Payroll. They assumed numbers magically appeared in people's accounts every 2 weeks. They assumed the system ran itself. What they didn't understand was that the system had a pulse, and for 10 years, I was its heartbeat. Every password, every override, every compliance filing, every emergency fix, it all ran through one vault, an encrypted vault only I knew how to access. I had told them more than once that it needed a backup administrator, that it was reckless to depend on one person. Mark Hollis laughed the last time I brought it up. We don't pay you to create problems, Linda. We pay you to solve them. That was 2 months ago. Now, sitting across from his smug face, I realized the solution was already in motion. By 9 a.m., my badge was disabled. By 9:15, IT would be trying to log into Payroll. By 9:30, they'd discover that the system didn't care about titles or corner offices. It cared about the one person who held the keys. Me. I signed their forms, gathered my bag, and walked out of that building. They thought they had cut me out cleanly, but what they had really done was start a countdown they couldn't stop. In 3 days, 2,000 people would find out what their arrogance had cost them. The payroll vault wasn't just another database. It was a fortress I had built out of necessity, not choice. Years ago, after one too many late nights cleaning up other people's mistakes, I created a system that locked every credential, every compliance code, every payroll schedule behind layers of encryption. One password opened the door, but that password itself was buried in a sequence of access steps only I could navigate. It wasn't arrogance that made me keep it that way. It was survival. I was the one they called when the system froze at 2 a.m., when audits threatened to expose gaps, when regulators came sniffing for compliance violations. I was the one who patched the cracks, rewrote the scripts, and made sure 2,000 employees never noticed how close their checks had come to being delayed. And every time I asked for a backup administrator, for someone else to share the responsibility, I was waved off. The CFO hated the idea of redundant roles. The CEO complained about unnecessary payroll costs. They liked the illusion of efficiency more than the reality of risk. Over time, I stopped asking. I let them believe the vault was a line item, a routine system that ran itself. I smiled when they nodded through meetings, too distracted to care about the difference between compliance and catastrophe. They had no idea that every quarterly filing, every benefits payment, every tax submission depended on me pressing the right sequence of keys at the right time. The truth was, the vault wasn't complicated. It was unforgiving. One misstep, one incorrect entry, and the system would reject the attempt. To me, it was second nature, like breathing. To them, it was invisible. That was their mistake. They mistook silence for simplicity. They mistook my efficiency for expendability. What I had built wasn't just payroll, it was the company's bloodstream. Cut me out, and the flow stopped. The irony was sharp. They thought firing me would save money. In reality, they had just created the costliest problem of their careers. I didn't need to sabotage anything. I didn't need to break a single law. All I had to do was walk away and let the vault sit in silence. The system would do the rest. And when Friday arrived, that silence would speak louder than I ever could. By Thursday morning, the cracks were already showing. I knew it because my phone lit up with numbers I hadn't seen in years. HR, IT, even a private line from the CFO's assistant. I didn't answer any of them. I let every call go to voicemail, each one more desperate than the last. Around noon, Linda Graham, the HR director, left a trembling message. She tried to keep her voice calm, but panic leaked through every word. Linda, we just need access to the vault. People are asking questions. Please, just tell me where the codes are. She didn't understand that the codes weren't written anywhere. They were in my head, layered in steps no one else had ever cared to learn. By afternoon, IT was tearing through servers looking for a back door, convinced they could brute force their way in. They didn't realize the system had been designed to shut down repeated failed attempts. Every time they tried and failed, they were only locking themselves out tighter. By evening, I imagined the executives sitting in a boardroom, whispering about contingencies. Maybe they still believed they had until Friday to solve it. Maybe they thought they could force their way through with consultants. What they didn't realize was that the countdown had already started. Every hour they wasted on phone calls, every wrong password attempt, every panicked meeting was just quicksand pulling them deeper. I cooked dinner, poured myself a glass of wine, and ignored the steady hum of my phone. Their chaos was growing, but in my apartment it was quiet, almost peaceful. They had no idea that silence itself was the deadliest weapon. By the time the sun rose on Friday, they'd be drowning in it. Friday arrived like any other payday, but the silence in people's bank accounts was deafening. By 9 a.m., the first ripple had already hit. Employees refreshed their banking apps, expecting the familiar deposit, and instead saw nothing. A few assumed it was a delay. By 10 o'clock, whispers spread through cubicles. By 11 o'clock, the whispers had hardened into accusations. Did payroll screw up? Did the bank freeze something? People started calling HR demanding answers. Phones rang nonstop, but there were no answers to give. Linda Graham, already on the verge of collapse, tried to calm the growing crowd in the lobby, but her words only made the anger sharper. By lunchtime, the truth was undeniable. 2,000 employees hadn't been paid, and panic turned into fury. Staff from every floor poured into the lobby, forming clusters of shouting voices. Some threatened to walk out. Others demanded an emergency meeting with leadership. The break room, usually filled with chatter and coffee smells, now buzzed with raw tension. People scrolled through social media, posting screenshots of their empty balances, tagging the company by name. By 1 o'clock, the hashtag was trending in the city. Local news reporters picked it up, tweeting, "Hundreds of employees unpaid at major firm, developing story." The pressure cooker finally blew around 2 p.m. when a group of warehouse workers stormed into the front offices, demanding to speak to someone in charge. Security tried to calm them, but even they hadn't been paid. The line between order and revolt blurred instantly. The CFO, Mark Hollis, locked himself in his office. The CEO, Daniel Whitmore, stayed hidden on the executive floor, refusing to face the chaos. In the lobby, employees shouted louder, some recording live videos, others calling family members to say they might not have a paycheck for rent. The building that had always thrived on silence and routine now pulsed with anger and fear. I imagined the executives staring at the scene through glass walls, watching their authority evaporate. They had fired the one person who could have stopped it, and now the consequences were eating them alive in real time. By 3 p.m., news vans were parked outside, cameras rolling as angry employees spilled out onto the sidewalk. The company's private crisis had become a public disaster. All of it, every voice raised, every headline written, every furious worker, was the sound of their arrogance unraveling. And the day wasn't even over. By late afternoon, the chaos had broken past the office walls and spilled onto every screen in the city. News anchors repeated the same headline in grave tones. Major employer fails to pay 2,000 workers. Reporters shoved microphones toward furious employees outside the building, capturing sound bites that spread like wildfire online. "I can't pay my rent," one said. "They don't care about us," another shouted. Each clip painted the company as greedy, careless, and collapsing. By 4:30 p.m., the story had gone national. Major outlets picked it up, calling it one of the largest payroll failures in years. Hashtags trended across platforms with strangers adding fuel, calling for boycotts and tagging government agencies. Clients noticed too. Vendors began pulling contracts, distancing themselves publicly to protect their own reputations. What had started as an internal mess was now a public scandal with millions of eyes watching. Inside the executive floor, panic reached a fever pitch. Mark Hollis, pale and sweating, barked orders no one could follow. Daniel Whitmore tried issuing a statement promising a minor technical glitch, but within minutes, screenshots of locked payroll screens leaked online, proving it was no glitch at all. Every attempt at control backfired, every word they spoke feeding the fire. Employees upstairs watched the news play on break room TVs, some cheering bitterly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The company that once bragged about stability and leadership was now the laughingstock of every social feed. And the most devastating part? It wasn't hackers, or regulators, or rivals that had caused it. It was silence. My silence. I hadn't touched a single system. I hadn't lifted a finger. Yet their empire was burning because I refused to give them the one thing they thought they didn't need: me. The breaking point came just after 5. A notice from the Department of Labor hit the executives' inboxes with the force of a hammer. All company accounts were officially frozen pending investigation into payroll violations. That meant no emergency wires, no vendor payments, no lifeline. Every dollar they thought they controlled was now locked behind federal walls. Vendors who had been patient through the afternoon cut ties immediately. Clients canceled contracts in writing, citing breach of trust. Creditors began calling in debts. The illusion of stability shattered in minutes. Inside the boardroom, I imagined the panic. The CEO slumped in his chair, the CFO pacing like a trapped animal, their assistants whispering about severance and lawsuits. For years they had boasted about efficiency, bragged about cutting unnecessary roles. Now those cuts had left them with no one to save them. Around 6 o'clock, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't HR or IT, it was Daniel Whitmore himself. His voice was lower than I'd ever heard it, cracked at the edges. "Linda, please, we'll pay you anything. Just unlock the vault." The arrogance was gone. All that remained was desperation. I let him talk. Listened to him stumble through excuses about misunderstanding my value, about how this wasn't personal. Then, when he finally went quiet, I gave him the only truth that mattered. "You fired the one person who kept the heart beating. Now you're learning what happens when the heart stops." Silence followed. I could almost hear the boardroom listening in on speakerphone, every executive realizing at the same moment that it was over. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I simply ended the call. In that single click, their empire flatlined. The government had them pinned. Their workers had turned against them. The public had written them off. There was no rescue left. They had chosen their ending the moment they chose to cut me out. By Monday morning, the company was no longer a business. It was a carcass. The stock price collapsed overnight, plummeting to pennies as investors fled. News outlets ran brutal headlines: corporate giant topples after payroll meltdown. Angry employees lined up outside the headquarters demanding answers, waving signs for the cameras. Some filed lawsuits. Others simply walked away, knowing they'd never see their wages. The building that once pulsed with quiet routine now echoed with silence and shame. Inside, Mark Hollis was forced out in disgrace, branded as the CFO who let payroll collapse. Daniel Whitmore's legacy evaporated, his name dragged through every broadcast as a man too blind to protect his own people. Regulators announced formal investigations, partners cut ties. Within weeks, the company filed for bankruptcy protection, its empire gutted from the inside out. And me? I didn't lift a hand to destroy them. I didn't hack. I didn't sabotage. I didn't break a law. I simply walked away, carrying nothing but my silence. That silence did what no rival, no competitor, no regulator had ever managed. It brought them to their knees. People often think revenge requires fire and fury, but sometimes it's colder than that. Sometimes it's the quiet absence of the one person who made everything work. They thought firing me was a line item, a clean cut to save money. What they never realized was that I was the blood in their veins, and once I was gone, all that was left was collapse. They thought they could erase me with a signature, but what they really erased was their own future. The moment they fired me, they cut out the one heartbeat keeping their empire alive. And when the paychecks didn't arrive, the silence they left behind spoke louder than any words I could have said. Looking back, I realized this wasn't just about revenge. It was about recognition. Too many companies undervalue the people who keep the gears turning. Executives see salaries as expenses, but they forget that behind every line item is a human being holding the whole system together. I was invisible until the day my absence shattered everything they had built. That's the lesson. Silence has power. It's not always the loudest voices in the room that hold the real leverage. It's the people who quietly carry the weight. The ones nobody notices until they're gone. In real life, we can't always orchestrate collapses, and we shouldn't want to. But we can learn to recognize our own worth. We can refuse to let others decide our value. Sometimes walking away from those who don't respect us is the most powerful move we can make, because their downfall is already written in the arrogance that blinds them. Real revenge isn't about destruction, it's about consequence. When arrogance meets neglect, collapse is inevitable. My silence didn't destroy them. Their own choices did. How to get started today. 1. Write down your core strengths, what you do that no one else can replace. 2. Stop minimizing your contributions. Practice stating your value out loud. 3. If your workplace doesn't respect it, start exploring options where it will be. If you've ever been underestimated like I was, share your story in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more, and pass this along to someone who needs to be reminded. Sometimes the quietest power is the most unstoppable.